welcome back, everyone. We are, as you can see, notwithstanding the theme of the summer school, we are ruthlessly efficient in coming back bang on time. So now we're going to be going into, for those of you who were here this morning, we're going to go into another workshop. For those of you who weren't, we're going into a workshop, and it will take the form of a breakout room. So it's trying to replicate some of what we would have done in an in-person summer school. And we'll also be using a thing called Mentimeter. So we're going to, firstly, I'm going to introduce Rachel Power, who will also be engaged in this. So Rachel, if you can, you've got your video on. How are you doing? Rachel is a PR and communications professional. Specializes in climate change communications. She's managed PR campaigns in Ireland and Europe and led the communications team that returned the Green Party to the Dáil in 2016. In her home city of Cork, she was chair of Wilton Justice Group and is a manager of the management committee of Cork Environmental Forum. She currently works in ocean energy research and is studying for a master's degree in climate change policy, media and society at DCU. In 2018, Rachel trained with Al Gore to become a climate reality leader, and in 2021 was appointed volunteer national coordinator to create and grow the Irish branch of Climate Reality Europe. So Rachel, you're very, very welcome here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
So yes, thanks for that introduction, Colette. My name is Rachel and I'm with the Climate Reality Project, which, as Colette said, is Al Gore's global project to bring about awareness of the science of climate change and also to inspire people to act. And we're big advocates as well of a transition to renewables. So what I want to have a look at in the exercise this afternoon is, about new ways of thinking about our systems. So a lot of what we've heard today is that we kind of have our priorities in the wrong place when it comes to our current economic system. So it's how can you start to flip things over and how can you start to think about things in a different way for more balanced systems that respect our boundaries in terms of our own well-being and in terms of the planet's well-being. So all of today we've been hearing about this idea of kind of perpetual growth, that this is the kind of 20th century system that we've been living in, and this idea that growth is governments kind of live or die on whether or not GDP and growth are doing well. Governments can fall if GDP isn't doing well. It's kind of like the holy grail, really, of our political, social, and economic system at the moment. But if you think about it, it's almost like that model is almost like you take an aeroplane and you put the aeroplane into the sky, take off into the sky, and it's just got to keep going higher and higher and higher. That's basically what the GDP and 20th century economic system is like. And that when you think about it in that way, you've got to start asking yourself, well, where's the plan for the plane to land? How do we get out of this? So that's what we'll be thinking about today, just a little bit of trying to maybe think in a different way about how we might go about things socially, economically, and politically. And you'll have heard activists and environmentalists saying things like system change, not climate change, and making those kind of calls. But it's other thought leaders are starting to think this way too. I was really interested there. John sent a message in the chat about the UN Secretary General saying, that real change is needed, that we can't keep going the way we're going, and talking about we're changing over to renewables. And I really like this quote from Joseph Stiglitz as well, the Nobel Prize winner in economics in 2001, which is basically saying that GDP is just the wrong way of going about things, and that the system that we have needs to be changed and replaced with a system that's more sustainable and values a lot more than just, the stuff that we make and the stuff that we buy. So when we're thinking about a new system and how we might go about it, we're going to look at an idea this afternoon from this lady, Kate Raworth, with her book, Donut Economics, and she wants to push economics into the 21st century. So as far as she's concerned, the systems that we've had belong, in the last century, and are no longer really viable now. And if you take a look at that picture that she has on the front of her book it's an American style donut, you know, it's the donut with the hole in the middle, or like one of those American bagels, you know, with the little hole in the middle. And she's kind of used this image to explain a new way of thinking, a new framework around economies and systems and holistic systems. And we'll look into that now in quite some considerable detail over the next couple of slides. And then in the exercise, we'll ask you to do a little exercise in thinking of that holistic system. Sean Healy there made a very good point during the panel discussion about a lot of politicians, and a lot of the way thinking is done is in silos. So, you know, I'm responsible for housing, so I'll think about housing, or I'm responsible for transport, so I'll think about transport. And what Kate Rayworth is inviting us to do is thinking about things in circles rather than silos, and how does each part of the economy and society, locally and globally, impact on each other. So we'll get into the kind of nuts and bolts of this model, or this framework that she has. And it starts with the center of the donut, so the hole in the donut, if you like, that little hole right in the center. And that's the social foundation. So these are based on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And these are sort of the floors that nobody should be falling below. So, you know, people should have enough access to energy, to water, to food. There should be enough gender equality, social equity, and democratic voice. But we know already, like we've been hearing today, there's massive shortfalls globally in this. We heard some statistics about food and hunger around the world. You know, I think about 15% of the world is illiterate. They don't, you know, have the education to read and write, with massive shortfalls already in this. And here at home, we've been hearing about the shortfalls in housing and health, in education. So that's the center of the donut. Ideally, this would be the kind of the areas that we wouldn't be falling below as societies. And then, you know, when we're thinking about how we want to change things for ourselves, we've always got to keep in mind that we live on this gorgeous little blue-green planet that we call home, and that we share with everybody else. So when we start making changes that suit ourselves, we can't make those changes in isolation. We have to make them kind of mindful of the impact that those changes might have on other parts of the world, or on other people in the world. And that's where Kate Rayworth starts introducing this idea of the ecological ceiling. So Sive earlier was talking about the planetary boundaries, and actually this ecological ceiling is based around that idea of the planetary boundaries, and you know, we see here again the climate change, the biodiversity loss, land conversion, those things that were covered as well in the planetary boundaries. So the idea here is this is the outside of the donut. This is the you know, the outer circle of the donut, and this is what we can't go beyond. This is what we can't overshoot, because the Earth just isn't capable of taking that kind of pressure. So the idea here is, you know, in terms of climate change, not doing anything that pushes us beyond the 1.5% as agreed in the Paris Agreement. In terms of biodiversity loss, it's how do you know, reverse or kind of limit that biodiversity loss in terms of in global ecological ceilings, things like land conversion, you know, nitrogen and phosphorus loading. How is that impacting the planet and the natural systems that the planet has? And can the natural planet take that? Can nature take that? And if not, then that's an overshoot and something we need to avoid hitting. So again, just to recap, the center of the donut, the hole in the middle of the donut, can be called the social foundation. These are the kind of the social areas that nobody should be falling below. Then the outer part of the donut is the ecological ceiling. So we should not go under the social foundation, but we also shouldn't overshoot what the planet can do for us in terms of the ecological ceiling. And then what we find in the middle there is the safe and just space for humanity. So this is where we're trying to get to ideally, and that's the idea behind donut economics. You don't go below your social foundation, you don't go above your ecological ceiling, and then you end up with everybody in the safe and just space for humanity. or a regenerative and distributive economy, rather than an economy that's just addicted to growth. So I think it'd be nice if we could hear from Kate Reworth herself on this. I'm going to play this video, and if you can't hear the sound, Colette, just let me know. I think Jerry might have a backup copy, but it's just a summary of what we've been saying already, so it's not too bad if we can't see it. Just let me know straight away if you have trouble hearing this, okay?
Perfect.
In the 20th century, economics lost its purpose and started chasing the false goal of GDP growth. In recent decades, that has pushed many societies into deepening inequality, and it's pushing us all towards ecological collapse. This century calls for a new goal, meeting the needs of all within the means of the planet. In other words, it's time to get into the donut, the sweet spot for humanity. But that's no easy task. Today, billions of people still fall short of their daily needs, from food, housing and energy to healthcare and education. And yet collectively, we've already overshot our pressure on some of Earth's most critical life support systems, driving climate change and the breakdown of biodiversity. What we do to this Earth in the next 50 years will shape the next 10,000. So let's replace that last century goal of endless growth with the goal of thriving in balance. And if we're to have half a chance of getting there, what economic mindset would be fit for the task?
So it's some really interesting questions that she asks there. And actually, when we look into donut economics, one of the questions she asks when she's going to cities or to communities or to countries even now and starting to, work with people of putting this new framework into practice, her question is, how can our city or our place be a home to a thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? So it's this idea that rather than just growth, you have people and countries and economies and nature thriving rather than just measuring growth. And if we break that down, if we look at thriving people, we could say, well, that's kind of a social idea. Thriving place would be that's local, where an area maybe that I might be living in. All people then might remind us of, our global obligations and considerations, and the whole planet then will be ecological, that idea that there is an ecological boundary around the planet. And we can separate those into these, what donut economics terms the fourfold lens. So that's this lens here on the right, the ecological ceiling, the social foundation. And then you can divide into the local ecological lens, the global ecological lens, the social local lens, and the global local lens. And we can start working then on new ways of thinking about those when we start thinking holistically about what's happening at home, what's happening in the wider world, what's happening from the point of view of what we need as a society, but how does that work in terms of the limitations ecologically. And that's the exercise that you're going to do this afternoon. We can't do everything. We can't do all different parts of the donut. We can't do all SDGs, and we can't do, we're all coming from different places. So we've decided to concentrate on just one this afternoon, which is energy. Because I know you all did this today. You probably plugged something in to get here. So it affects all of us. And you're going to see these 4 questions as we go down through the exercise, which Jerry and John will show you in a moment. So don't worry too much about noting them now. But we're going to look, we're going to ask you to either take ecology, the ecological ceiling, as what you'd like to investigate, or take the social floor as what you'd like to investigate, and think about them then on a spectrum of local to global. So if you're looking at the ecological ceiling, we'd be saying, have a think about how nature works nearby. So what's nature in your place now telling you about how you might meet your energy needs, and there are some ideas from your geography, from the landscape. How could we get the energy we need from ideas from nature nearby locally? And then push that right out to the global spectrum. And if you were to make changes at home to how you get your energy needs, what would be the impact on the rest of the planet? So for example, would you be taking resources from somewhere else on the planet where they might be needed more often. You might also have considerations like, if we completely ban fossil fuels, what about countries in other parts of the world that feel they still need them to catch up basically with the global north? So there's considerations around that. So if you're looking at the ecological side of energy, what could we change at home? But then what limitations do we have globally, or if not limitations, at least considerations globally? And the same for socially. If you're going to look at the social sort of side of the lens, the social foundation of the lens during this exercise, you'll be asking yourself, how can we provide clean and affordable energy to everybody in your city or in where you're living or in your country? For example, yesterday there was a lady on the news who's started burning turf again because she can't afford electricity bills. And, you know, that's a real sort of local problem for her. So how do we change that around? How do we make that better? But again, pushing it out to the global kind of consideration. What does that mean? If we change things at home, what does that mean? We've seen in other countries protests over carbon tax, things like that. And then there's the whole idea of climate justice, the fact that the countries in the world who've done least to cause climate chaos are the ones who are suffering most from it and the least able to mitigate the impacts of it. So that will be your exercise. I'm going to hand over to Jerry and John now. I hope we're okay on time, just to bring you through how that exercise is going to work practically. Thanks, Colette.